I knew something was wrong the second I turned onto Timber Ridge Road and saw the massive concrete barriers blocking the entrance to my driveway. My hands tightened on the steering wheel of my truck as I pulled over to the shoulder, staring at the obstruction in disbelief. This was my private road, the one I'd paid to pave myself 3 years ago when I bought this property in the hills outside Asheville, North Carolina. The road served exactly 2 properties, mine and my neighbor Tom's place further up the mountain. I got out of the truck and walked up to the barriers. They were serious concrete blocks, the kind you'd see at highway construction sites, easily weighing a ton each. 3 of them completely blocked the entrance, with orange traffic cones arranged around them like some kind of official setup. A laminated sign was zip-tied to the middle barrier. Road closed by order of Timber Creek HOA Board. Violation of Community Standards Code 14.7. Contact HOA office for information. My blood pressure spiked immediately. I'd been dealing with the Timber Creek Homeowners Association for 2 years now, ever since they'd somehow decided that my property, which was a full quarter-mile outside their actual development, fell under their jurisdiction. It started with a letter claiming I owed back dues. Then came the violations about my truck being parked in my own driveway, my garden shed being the wrong color, and my refusal to remove the old oak tree they claimed was a visual disturbance. I'd fought every single one, providing documentation that my property deed predated their development by 15 years, and that I'd never signed any covenant or agreement with them. I pulled out my phone and called Tom. He answered on the second ring. "Zach, thank God," he said before I could speak. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. Did you see what they did? I'm looking at it right now. When did this happen?" "Sometime last night. I came down the mountain at 6 this morning to get to work and almost hit the damn things." I called the sheriff's office, but they said it's a civil matter between me and the HOA. I'm stuck at the bottom of the mountain with my truck. Had to get my wife to drive me to work from town. I ran my hand through my hair, feeling the frustration building. This is insane. They can't just block a private road. Well, they did. I talked to Patricia Hamilton this morning. You know, the HOA president. I knew Patricia all right. A 52-year-old woman with bleached blonde hair, always styled in that specific Karen cut. The kind that screamed she wanted to speak to a manager at every establishment she entered. She wore too much makeup, drove a white Mercedes SUV, and treated her position as HOA president like she was the mayor of a small nation. I'd had exactly 3 interactions with her, and each one had left me more convinced that she'd made tormenting people her life's purpose. What did she say? She said the road is actually an easement that crosses HOA property, and we never got proper permission to use it. Complete garbage, obviously. But she's claiming they have the legal right to restrict access until we comply with their demands and pay some kind of access fee. I looked back at my truck, then at the barriers, then up the winding dirt road that led to my house. I'd moved to this property specifically for the peace and quiet, for the 1.5 acres of wooded land where I could work on my carpentry projects and live without neighbors breathing down my neck. The house itself was a modest 2-bedroom cabin I'd renovated myself, with a workshop out back where I built custom furniture. My whole life was up that road, my tools, my projects, my home. "I'm going to the HOA office," I said. "This ends today. Good luck, man. Let me know what happens." I got back in my truck and drove down the mountain toward the Timber Creek development. The HOA office was located in a small building near the entrance of their community, a pretentious neighborhood of cookie-cutter houses that all looked identical except for the color of their shutters. I'd been there twice before, both times leaving more frustrated than when I'd arrived. The office was open, and I found Patricia sitting behind the reception desk, typing on her computer. She looked up when I walked in, and her expression shifted to something between smugness and fake concern. "Zach Ellis," she said, drawing out my name like she was addressing a misbehaving child. "I wondered when you'd show up." "You blocked my road," I said, keeping my voice level despite wanting to shout. "You put concrete barriers across my private driveway." "Our easement," she corrected, holding up one finger. "And technically, it's not your private anything. The road crosses HOA property, which means it falls under our jurisdiction and regulations." I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd saved of my property survey. This is my property line. The road is entirely on my land and Tom's land. It doesn't cross any HOA property. Patricia didn't even look at the phone. Our lawyers disagree. We've done our own survey, and it clearly shows that the first 50 feet of that road crosses a corner of our property. Since you've refused to pay your HOA dues or comply with any of our reasonable requests, the board voted unanimously to restrict access until you come into compliance. I'm not part of your HOA. My house isn't in your development. I've shown you my deed multiple times. Your property is within our extended boundary zone, which was established in 2019. All properties within that zone are subject to HOA oversight. I'd heard this argument before. The problem was that the extended boundary zone wasn't a real thing. They'd made it up, drawn some lines on a map, and decided that any property within those imaginary boundaries had to follow their rules. I'd consulted with a lawyer 6 months ago who told me it was completely unenforceable, but that fighting it in court would cost thousands of dollars. I'd been hoping to just ignore them until they gave up. Clearly, that strategy had failed. "Remove the barriers," I said, "today, or I'm calling my lawyer." Patricia leaned back in her chair, her expression hardening. "You're welcome to do that. In the meantime, the barriers stay until you pay the outstanding fees and violations, which currently total $8,300. The number hit me like a punch. $8,000? For what? She pulled out a printed document and slid it across the desk. It was itemized in excruciating detail. Unpaid HOA dues for 2 years, late fees, violation fines for my truck, my shed, my tree, my unkempt yard, my unauthorized construction, the deck I'd added to my house, and now something called easement usage fees that apparently I owed retroactively for 3 years. "This is extortion," I said. "This is enforcement of community standards. Pay the fees or the barriers stay. Your choice, Zach." I left the office before I said something I'd regret. Back in my truck, I sat for a few minutes trying to calm down and think rationally. I called my lawyer, a guy named Robert Chen who'd helped me with the property purchase years ago. "Zach, good to hear from you," he answered. "What's going on?" I explained the situation, from the barriers to Patricia's demands. He listened quietly, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement. "Okay," he said when I finished. "First thing, they absolutely cannot block access to your property like that. That's illegal, full stop. Second thing, we're going to send them a cease and desist letter today demanding they remove the barriers within 24 hours. Third thing, start documenting everything. Take photos, save emails, record conversations if North Carolina allows it, which it does since it's a one-party consent state. We're building a case here. How long is this going to take? If they don't comply with the cease and desist, we'll file for an emergency injunction. That could get the barriers removed within a few days, maybe a week. But Zach, I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to cost money. We're talking at least $5,000 just to start, maybe more if it goes to court." I closed my eyes. $5,000 I didn't really have, to fight a fight I shouldn't have to fight in the first place. "Do it," I said. "Send the letter. I'll have it out this afternoon. In the meantime, stay calm and don't do anything that could make this worse." I agreed and hung up, then sat there staring at the steering wheel. I needed to get home. I needed my tools, my clothes, my life. The barriers weren't insurmountable. I could probably move them with the right equipment, but that would give Patricia exactly the ammunition she wanted to claim I was trespassing or destroying property. I drove back to my block driveway and parked. The walk up to my house was about half a mile on the winding road. I could hike it, but I couldn't carry much. I grabbed a backpack from behind my seat and started walking. The October air was crisp and cool, leaves crunching under my boots. Under different circumstances, it would have been a pleasant walk. Instead, every step made me angrier. This was my property, my home, and some power-hungry HOA board member had decided she could just cut me off from it. When I reached my house, everything looked normal. My workshop was locked up, my truck was parked in its usual spot, and the deck I'd built last year was exactly as I'd left it. I went inside and started packing essentials: clothes, toiletries, my laptop, some important documents. I also grabbed my folder of property records, survey documents, and all the correspondence I'd had with the HOA over the past 2 years. My phone rang. It was Tom. "Hey, I talked to my lawyer," he said. "She's saying the same thing yours probably did. They can't legally block us, but getting them to remove the barriers is going to take time." "How are you getting to your house?" "I'm not really. I grabbed some stuff this morning before I left for work, but I'm staying at my sister's place in town until this gets sorted out. My wife is furious. She's got all her work stuff at the house, and now she can't get to it. This is insane. Tell me about it." "Hey, I was thinking. What if we just move the barriers ourselves?" My lawyer said not to. "It would give them ammunition." Tom sighed. "Yeah, mine said the same thing. But Zach, I can't be without access to my house for days or weeks. I've got work deadlines, my wife's got client meetings. We can't just abandon our home because Patricia Hamilton has a power complex." He had a point, but I also knew that the legal route was the right way to handle this. Give it a few days. Let the lawyers do their thing. If nothing changes, we'll figure something out. We hung up and I finished packing. The hike back down with a loaded backpack was less pleasant than the walk up. By the time I reached my truck, I was sweating despite the cool air, and my anger had settled into a cold, determined fury. I spent that night at a cheap motel in Asheville, lying awake and staring at the ceiling. I'd lived in my house for 3 years. I'd poured my savings and my labor into making it exactly what I wanted. And now, I couldn't even access it because of an HOA that had no legitimate authority over me in the first place. The next morning, Robert sent me a copy of the cease and desist letter. It was professional and firm, laying out exactly why the barriers were illegal and demanding their immediate removal. He'd sent it via email and certified mail to Patricia and the entire HOA board. "Now we wait," Robert told me over the phone. "They have 24 hours to comply. If they don't, we file for the injunction." I went back to the barriers that afternoon, half hoping they'd be gone. They weren't. If anything, the setup looked more permanent. Someone had added more cones and another sign that read, "Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." I took photos of everything and sent them to Robert. The 24 hours came and went. The barriers stayed. Robert filed for an emergency injunction with the county court, but the earliest hearing date we could get was 5 days away. 5 more days of being locked out of my own home. Tom called me on the 3rd day, his voice tight with stress. "My company is threatening to fire me if I don't complete my project. All my equipment is at my home office. I can't access it. I'm about to lose my job because of this. Can you explain the situation to them? I did. They don't care. They need the work done, and if I can't do it, they'll find someone who can. I felt the weight of his predicament. Tom was a freelance software developer who worked from home. His entire livelihood depended on access to his equipment and files. What are you going to do? I'm thinking about just moving the barriers myself. I don't care anymore. I'll deal with the legal consequences later. Tom, wait. Just wait until the hearing. It's 2 more days. 2 days might be too late. He hung up before I could respond. I immediately called him back, but it went to voicemail. I drove back to the barriers, afraid I'd find Tom there with a truck and a chain, but the area was empty. I tried calling him 3 more times before he finally answered. I'm not doing anything today, he said. But Zach, I can't promise I'll wait until the hearing. I've got to think about my family. I understood his position, but I also knew that if he moved those barriers before the legal process played out, it would complicate everything. Just hold on a little longer, please. He agreed reluctantly. The next day, something changed. I was at the barriers again, documenting their continued presence for Robert when a fire department SUV pulled up. The driver was a middle-aged man in a fire chief's uniform. He got out and introduced himself as Chief Mark Torres. "You Zach Ellis?" he asked. "That's me. I got a call from County Dispatch about a potential code violation, something about a blocked access road." He looked at the barriers. "This is what they were talking about. The HOA put these up 6 days ago. It's blocking access to my property and my neighbor's property up the mountain." Chief Torres walked around the barriers, examining them carefully. He pulled out his phone and took several photos, then made some notes on a small pad. "This is your private road, mine and my neighbor's. It serves only our 2 properties. And the HOA blocked it. They claim they have the right to because it allegedly crosses their property. My lawyer disagrees, and we've got a court hearing tomorrow." He nodded slowly, his expression growing serious. "Mr. Ellis, I need to be clear about something. This isn't just about property access. This is a fire safety issue. If there's an emergency at your property or your neighbor's property, fire crews and ambulances can't get through. These barriers are blocking emergency vehicle access." The implications hit me immediately. "Can you make them remove the barriers? I can cite them for a fire code violation. I can also inform them that they're creating a liability issue. If someone gets hurt or property gets damaged because emergency services can't access these homes, the HOA could be held responsible." He looked back at the barriers. "How far up the mountain are the houses?" "Mine's about half a mile. Tom's is another 1/4 mile past mine." "And there's no other access road?" "No, this is it." Chief Torres made more notes. "I'm going to need to inspect both properties to verify the access situation. Can you take me up there?" I explained that I'd been walking it, and he offered to drive us in his SUV. The vehicle had enough clearance to navigate around the barriers by going partially off-road, though it was a tight squeeze. We drove up to my property first, and I showed him the layout. My house, my workshop, the surrounding woods. "You live here alone?" he asked. "Just me." "Any medical conditions I should be aware of? Anything that might require emergency response?" "No, I'm healthy." We continued up to Tom's property. His house was larger than mine, a 2-story place with a garage and a kid's play set in the yard. Chief Torres took more photos and notes. "And there's no way emergency vehicles can access this property except through that road we just came up?" "That's correct. It's the only way in or out." On the drive back down, Chief Torres was quiet, clearly thinking. When we reached the barriers again, he turned to me. "Mr. Ellis, I'm going to issue a citation to the HOA for blocking emergency access. This is a serious violation, and they need to remove these barriers immediately. I'll give them 48 hours to comply. If they don't, we'll escalate to county enforcement and they could face daily fines until the issue is resolved. Relief washed over me. Thank you. This has been a nightmare. I'm just doing my job. Nobody should be cut off from their property like this, especially not in a way that compromises safety. He handed me his card. If you have any problems, call me directly. I watched him drive away, feeling hopeful for the first time in a week. Then I called Tom and told him the news. "That's great," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. Maybe this will finally end. The next morning was the court hearing for the emergency injunction. I met Robert at the courthouse, a modern building in downtown Asheville. Patricia was there with the HOA's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man in his 40s named Richard Vanderwall. The hearing was in front of Judge Catherine Morrison, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd been on the bench for 20 years. Robert presented our case, explaining how the barriers blocked access to private property, and showing the property surveys that proved the road didn't cross HOA land. Vanderwall countered with their survey, which did show a small corner of the road crossing what they claimed was HOA property. He argued that the HOA had the right to control access to their property, and that we'd been given ample opportunity to resolve the issue through proper channels. Judge Morrison listened to both sides, reviewing the documents. Then she asked a simple question. "Mr. Vanderwall, are you aware that the fire department has cited your client for blocking emergency access?" Vanderwall's expression flickered with surprise. "I was not aware of that, Your Honor." As of yesterday afternoon, the fire chief issued a citation for violation of county fire code. He's given the HOA 48 hours to remove the barriers or face daily fines. She looked at Patricia, who'd gone pale. "Miss Hamilton, can you explain to me why the HOA thought it was appropriate to block access to occupied residences?" Patricia stood up, her voice defensive. "Your Honor, we were simply enforcing our property rights and community standards. Mr. Ellis has refused to comply with reasonable requests." "Reasonable?" Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Cutting off access to someone's home is reasonable. We provided notice of our intentions." "Did you consult with the fire department before erecting these barriers?" Patricia hesitated. "No, Your Honor." "Did you consider that you might be creating a safety hazard?" "We believed we were within our rights." Judge Morrison set down the papers and looked at both lawyers. "Here's my ruling. The barriers will be removed immediately, not in 48 hours, not by the end of the day. Immediately. The HOA will also be responsible for any costs incurred by the plaintiffs during the period of blocked access, including legal fees. Furthermore, I'm ordering an independent survey of the property lines to determine, once and for all, whether this road crosses HOA property. Until that survey is complete and reviewed by this court, the HOA is prohibited from interfering with access to the plaintiff's properties in any way." She looked at Patricia. "Miss Hamilton, you understand this order?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Then I suggest you start making phone calls to get those barriers moved. This hearing is adjourned." I felt like I could breathe for the first time in a week. Robert shook my hand, grinning. That went better than I expected. Outside the courthouse, Patricia stormed past us without a word, her phone already pressed to her ear. Vanderwall followed her, looking resigned. I called Tom and gave him the news. "Finally," he said. "I'll head up there this afternoon to see if they've actually removed them." I drove back to Timber Ridge Road, hoping to see the barriers already gone. They weren't, but within an hour, a truck arrived with equipment and a crew. I watched from my parked vehicle as they loaded the concrete blocks onto a flatbed trailer. The process took about 90 minutes, and when they were done, the road was clear. I drove up to my house, feeling a mix of relief and lingering anger. Relief that I could finally access my home again. Anger that it had taken a week, a lawyer, a fire chief's citation, and a court order to make it happen. Tom called me that evening. "I'm home. My wife is home. We're good, but Zach, I'm still furious about this." "Same." "What do you think happens next?" "The independent survey will prove we're right, and hopefully the HOA will finally leave us alone." I wanted to believe that, but I had a sinking feeling that Patricia Hamilton wasn't done yet. The independent survey was conducted 2 weeks later by a licensed surveyor hired by the court. I met him at the property, along with Tom and a representative from the HOA, a board member named Stephen Crenshaw, who seemed far more reasonable than Patricia. The surveyor spent 3 hours measuring, documenting, and verifying property lines. When he was done, he showed us his preliminary findings on a tablet. The road was entirely on mine and Tom's property. It didn't cross HOA land at all. The survey the HOA had commissioned was wrong, likely because they'd used an outdated plat map that didn't account for a boundary adjustment that had been filed 20 years ago. Stephen looked embarrassed. "I'll present this to the board. I think we owe you both an apology." "An apology doesn't cover the week I was locked out of my house, or the thousands I spent on legal fees," I said. "I understand. We'll discuss restitution at the next board meeting." The official survey results were filed with the court a week later. Judge Morrison reviewed them and issued a final ruling. The road was private property. The HOA had no jurisdiction over it, and my property was not subject to HOA oversight. She also ordered the HOA to pay my legal fees and Tom's legal fees, totaling about $7,000 between us. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 weeks after the court ruling, I came home to find a citation taped to my front door. It was from the County Code Enforcement Office, claiming I had unpermitted construction on my property, specifically the deck I'd added 2 years ago. The citation demanded I appear at a hearing to show proof of permits or face fines and potential demolition. I knew immediately who'd filed the complaint. I called the Code Enforcement Office and confirmed that the complaint had been submitted anonymously, but the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Patricia couldn't use the HOA to harass me anymore, so she'd found another avenue. I pulled out my records and found the permit I'd obtained for the deck. It was all legal and properly filed. I brought it to the hearing, showed it to the code enforcement officer, and the citation was dismissed. But it was another hassle, another hour of my life wasted dealing with Patricia's vendetta. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the county health department about an alleged septic system violation. Again, I had to dig through my records, prove everything was legal and up to code, and get the complaint dismissed. Tom started getting similar complaints. His fence was allegedly too tall. His driveway was allegedly draining onto county property. His shed was allegedly in violation of setback requirements. Every complaint was filed anonymously. Every complaint turned out to be baseless, and every complaint required time, documentation, and stress to resolve. After the 4th complaint in 2 months, I'd had enough. I called Robert. "This is harassment," I told him. "Patricia is using every county department she can think of to make my life miserable. Can you prove it's her? The complaints are anonymous, but who else would it be? And it's not just me. Tom's getting hit with the same thing." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Okay, here's what we can do. We can file a harassment lawsuit against Patricia personally and against the HOA. We'll need to document every complaint, every citation, every interaction. We'll establish a pattern of behavior. It's not a slam dunk, but if we can show that these complaints started immediately after the court ruling and that they're all baseless, we've got a case. How much is this going to cost? More than the last case, I'm afraid. We're talking 10 to 15,000, maybe more if it goes to trial. I couldn't afford that. I just couldn't. My savings were already depleted from the previous legal battle. There's got to be another way. There is. You can ignore the complaints, keep disproving them, and hope she eventually gives up. Or you can report the harassment to the police and see if they'll do anything about it. I tried the police route first. I went to the county sheriff's office and explained the situation to a deputy. He listened politely, took notes, and then basically told me it was a civil matter unless I could prove Patricia was making false reports intentionally. Even then, it would be hard to prosecute. The complaints kept coming. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, I'd get a new citation or letter from some county department. I started keeping a detailed log, dates, allegations, resolutions, time spent dealing with each one. Tom did the same. In early December, I got a complaint that stood out from the others. It was from the State Environmental Agency, claiming I had illegally cleared protected wetlands on my property. This was serious. Wetland violations could result in massive fines and even criminal charges. I immediately called the environmental office and spoke with an inspector named Jennifer Wade. She was professional and straightforward. "Mr. Ellis, we received a complaint that you've cleared approximately half an acre of wetlands without the required permits. I need to schedule a site inspection to verify the claim." "There are no wetlands on my property," I said. "I've got the environmental assessment that was done when I bought the place. It specifically states there are no wetlands. I'll still need to do the inspection. It's protocol." She came out 3 days later. I showed her the environmental assessment, walked her around the entire property, and pointed out that there was no standing water, no wetland vegetation, nothing that would indicate wetlands. She took soil samples, examined the vegetation, and reviewed my documents. "Mr. Ellis, you're right. There are no wetlands here. This complaint was completely unfounded." She made notes on her tablet. "Can I ask, do you know who filed the complaint?" "I have a pretty good idea, but I can't prove it." She nodded slowly. "I'm going to note in my report that this appears to be a false complaint." Filing false environmental reports is a crime. If we determine someone is deliberately wasting state resources with bogus complaints, we can pursue charges. Really? Really? And between you and me, this is the third suspicious complaint I've investigated in this area in the past month. Same anonymous reporting system, same pattern of completely baseless allegations. Someone's abusing the system. I told her about the HOA situation, about Patricia, about the pattern of harassment Tom and I had been experiencing. She listened carefully. "Do you have documentation of all the complaints you've received?" I showed her my log. She photographed it with her phone. "I'm going to look into this further. If we can establish a pattern of false reporting, we can take action." After she left, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, finally, there would be consequences for Patricia's actions. The week before Christmas, I got a call from Jennifer Wade. "Mr. Ellis, I wanted to update you on our investigation. We've traced multiple false complaints filed with various county and state departments back to the same IP address. That address belongs to the Timber Creek HOA office. We've also found evidence that Patricia Hamilton personally filed several of these complaints using her name on internal forms, even though they were submitted anonymously to you." My heart started pounding. So, what happens now? We're referring the case to the district attorney's office. Filing false reports with state agencies is a Class 1 misdemeanor in North Carolina. Miss Hamilton could face criminal charges. The county is also looking at the false reports filed with local departments. Are you serious? Very serious. This isn't just about harassing you and your neighbor. She's wasted significant government resources, tied up inspectors and investigators with bogus complaints, and potentially prevented us from responding to legitimate issues. It's a crime, and we're treating it as such. I thanked her and immediately called Tom. He was ecstatic. Finally, he said. Maybe this nightmare is actually ending. 2 weeks later, in early January, Patricia Hamilton was charged with 6 counts of filing false reports and 1 count of harassment. The local newspaper ran a story about it, detailing the HOA situation and the subsequent harassment campaign. The story painted Patricia in exactly the light she deserved. A petty tyrant who'd abused her position and broken the law to harass people who dared to stand up to her. The HOA board, faced with the public embarrassment and legal liability, voted to remove Patricia as president. Stephen Crenshaw was elected as the new president, and one of his first acts was to issue a formal apology to me and Tom, along with a written acknowledgement that our properties were not subject to HOA jurisdiction. Patricia's criminal case moved slowly through the system. Her lawyer tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that she believed the complaints were legitimate. The prosecutor countered with evidence showing that Patricia had knowingly filed false reports, including emails where she discussed targeting me and Tom with every avenue available. In March, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to 3 counts of filing false reports in exchange for the other charges being dropped. She was sentenced to probation, community service, and ordered to pay restitution to the county and state for the costs of the investigations. She was also ordered to pay me and Tom for our documented expenses dealing with the false complaints. The restitution check I received was for $4,200. It didn't cover all my costs, but it was something. Tom and I met for beers at a local brewery in Asheville to celebrate the end of the ordeal. We'd become good friends through the whole mess, bonded by the shared experience of fighting an absurd battle. To private property, Tom said, raising his glass. To private property, I echoed. Think she'll leave us alone now? She'd better. She's on probation. 1 more stunt and she's in real trouble. Tom nodded. Still, I'm keeping my documentation just in case. Same. We talked about other things, normal things. Tom's work projects, my furniture orders, plans for spring. It felt good to talk about life without the constant shadow of HOA drama hanging over everything. As spring arrived, life returned to normal. I worked in my shop, took on new carpentry projects, and enjoyed my property without interference. The oak tree I'd refused to remove bloomed beautifully. My garden shed remained its unauthorized color. My truck sat in my driveway exactly where it belonged. I occasionally drove past the Timber Creek development and saw the HOA office. There was a new sign out front with Stephen's name listed as president. I never saw Patricia's white Mercedes SUV anymore. Rumor had it she'd moved out of the development entirely, unable to face the neighbors after everything that had happened. In May, I got a letter from the HOA. My first instinct was dread, but when I opened it, I found an invitation to a community barbecue. There was a handwritten note from Stephen. We'd love to have you and Tom join us. New leadership, new beginning, no strings attached. I showed it to Tom. He laughed. Should we go? Maybe. Could be interesting to see what the place is like without Patricia running it. We decided to go, more out of curiosity than anything else. The barbecue was held at the community clubhouse, and about 50 people showed up. Stephen introduced himself to everyone who didn't know him, and there was a decidedly different atmosphere than I'd expected. People were relaxed, friendly. Nobody mentioned property violations or community standards. Stephen pulled me aside at one point. "Zach, I want you to know that the board has reviewed all of Patricia's actions over the past few years. We've voided every citation and fine she issued outside the actual HOA boundaries. We've also implemented new rules about oversight authority. We're going back to basics, managing the community, not expanding into places we don't belong." "I appreciate that," I said. "We also voted to pay your remaining legal fees. The full amount, whatever wasn't covered by the court order or the restitution. It's the right thing to do." I was stunned. "That's generous. It's fair. Patricia abused her position, and the HOA is responsible for that. We're trying to make it right." A week later, I received a check for $8,500 from the HOA, covering all my remaining legal expenses. With that and the restitution from Patricia, I was actually made whole financially. More importantly, I had my peace back. Summer came, and with it, a heat wave that blanketed western North Carolina. I was working in my shop one afternoon when I heard sirens in the distance. They got closer, and then I saw smoke rising from somewhere down the mountain. I walked to the edge of my property and looked down toward the Timber Creek development. There was definitely a fire somewhere in that area. I drove down to see if I could help. Fire trucks were parked throughout the development, and crews were battling a house fire on one of the side streets. The house was fully engulfed, flames shooting through the roof. Residents stood in clusters, watching the firefighters work. I spotted Chief Torres directing operations. Once the fire was under control, I approached him. "Chief, is everyone okay?" He recognized me. "Mr. Ellis." "Yeah, everyone got out safely. Family was home when it started, but they evacuated quickly." He wiped sweat from his forehead. "Good thing we had clear access to the neighborhood." A fire like this, every second counts. Was this anywhere near where those barriers were? Close enough. If those barriers had still been up back when we responded to this call, we'd have lost critical minutes. Could have been the difference between saving the house and losing it. He looked at the smoldering structure. "We'll probably still lose it, but at least nobody died." The implications were clear. Patricia's decision to block that road could have had deadly consequences. If there'd been a fire at my place, or Tom's place during that week when the barriers were up, if someone had been injured or killed because emergency services couldn't get through, she'd be facing much more serious charges than filing false reports. I drove home thinking about how close things had come to disaster, not just for me and Tom, but potentially for the whole area. Patricia's petty power trip could have gotten someone killed. That evening, I sat on my deck with a beer and watched the sunset. The mountains were beautiful in the fading light, the trees casting long shadows across my property. This was what I'd wanted when I bought the place: peace, quiet, and the freedom to live my life without anyone dictating what I could or couldn't do with my own property. The HOA war was over. I'd won, though it hadn't felt like winning for a long time. It had felt like surviving, like enduring, like fighting a stupid fight that should never have happened in the first place. But it was done. The barriers were gone. Patricia was gone. The harassment had stopped. My property was mine, legally and definitively established by court order. The road was clear, and it would stay clear. I thought about all the people who deal with HOA nonsense every day, who face violations and fines, and power-hungry board members who treat their positions like fiefdoms. I'd been lucky in a way. I had the resources to fight back, the the documentation to prove my case, and eventually the support of the legal system and the fire department. Not everyone had that. Tom called me later that night. "Did you see the fire?" "Yeah, I was down there. Everyone got out okay." Chief Torres called me. He wanted to make sure we knew that if those barriers had still been up, the response would have been delayed. He said to tell us that our fight probably saved that family's life. I hadn't thought about it that way, but he was right. By forcing the issue, by refusing to back down, by getting the fire department involved, we'd ensured that emergency access was protected. Not just for us, but for everyone. "That makes it all worth it," I said. "Yeah, it does." We hung up, and I sat there for a while longer, watching the stars come out. The Milky Way was visible here, far from city lights. It was one of the things I loved most about the property. In the following months, I kept in touch with Stephen and the HOA board. They were genuinely trying to do better, to run the association the way it was supposed to be run. Maintaining common areas, organizing community events, handling actual issues within their jurisdiction. They weren't trying to expand their power or control properties that didn't belong to them. Patricia never contacted me, and I never saw her again. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Florida, starting fresh somewhere else. I hoped she'd learned her lesson, but I had my doubts. People like Patricia rarely changed. In October, nearly a year after the barriers had first appeared, the local newspaper did a follow-up story on the case. They interviewed me, Tom, Chief Torres, and Stephen. The article talked about HOA overreach, property rights, and the importance of emergency access. It used our situation as a cautionary tale about what happens when HOA boards operate without proper oversight or accountability. The article got picked up by a few national outlets, and suddenly, I was getting emails and messages from people all over the country who dealt with similar situations. Some had won their battles, some had lost, and some were still fighting. I responded to as many as I could, sharing what I'd learned and offering encouragement. One message stuck with me. It was from a woman in Texas whose HOA had tried to foreclose on her house over unpaid fines she didn't actually owe. She'd been fighting them for 3 years, spending her savings on legal fees, and was close to giving up. My story had given her hope that it was possible to win. I sent her Robert's contact information and the details of how we'd documented everything. A few months later, she emailed to tell me she'd won her case. The foreclosure had been thrown out, and the HOA had been ordered to pay her legal fees. It felt good to know that something positive had come from the nightmare I'd endured. By the time the second anniversary of the barrier incident rolled around, my life had fully returned to normal. Better than normal, actually. My carpentry business was thriving. I'd paid off the last of my legal debts, and I'd even started dating someone I'd met at the community barbecue. Her name was Helen Dawson, and she lived in the Timber Creek development. She'd been one of the residents who'd opposed Patricia's leadership and had voted for Stephen in the election. Helen and I were sitting on my deck one evening when she brought up the whole situation. "You know, a lot of people in the development felt awful about what Patricia did," she said. "We didn't know how bad it had gotten until everything came out in the news. You weren't on the board, though. It wasn't your fault. Still, she was representing our community, and she made us all look terrible. Stephen's been working hard to rebuild relationships with the neighbors outside the development, but some people still won't talk to us. I don't blame anyone except Patricia and the board members who went along with her," I said. "Most people in your neighborhood are decent. I know that now." She smiled. "I'm glad you gave us another chance." We watched the sunset together, and I realized that the whole ordeal had taught me something important. Not everyone in an HOA is a petty tyrant. Not every board member is power hungry. Most people are just trying to maintain their community and get along with their neighbors. It's the few bad actors, the Patricias of the world, who cause the problems. But it also taught me that standing up to those bad actors is necessary. If I'd backed down, if I'd paid the bogus fees and accepted the HOA's false authority, Patricia would have won. She would have continued harassing other people, expanding her power, and making life miserable for anyone who dared to question her. By fighting back, by taking it to court, by involving the fire department and documenting everything, Tom and I had stopped her. We'd protected not just our own properties, but the principle that property rights mean something and that HOAs can't just invent authority they don't have. The barriers were gone, but the lessons remained. I kept all my documentation filed away in case I ever needed it again. I stayed in touch with Robert, who'd become a friend as well as a lawyer. I maintained a good relationship with Chief Torres and the fire department. And I never took for granted my access to my own property. Tom and his wife eventually sold their house and moved to Colorado for a job opportunity, but we stayed in touch. He'd send me photos of his new place in the mountains, and I'd send him pictures of my latest furniture projects. We joke about starting an HOA survivors support group. Years passed, and the whole incident faded into memory. New people moved into the Timber Creek development who'd never heard of Patricia Hamilton or the barrier controversy. The HOA continued to operate under Stephen's leadership, and by all accounts, it was running smoothly and staying within its actual boundaries. I stayed in my house on the mountain, building furniture, enjoying the quiet, and living life on my own terms. The private road remained open and accessible, just as it should be. No barriers, no citations, no harassment. Just a simple dirt and gravel road leading up to a simple house where a man could live in peace. That was all I'd ever wanted. It had taken a year of fighting, thousands of dollars, court orders, fire department citations, criminal charges, and a whole lot of stress to secure it. But in the end, it was worth it, because some things are worth fighting for. Your home is one of them. Your property rights are one of them. And the principle that no one, not even an HOA president with a God complex, can arbitrarily cut you off from your own life. The barriers were gone, and they were never coming back. That was enough. I proposed to Helen on that deck 2 years after we met. She said yes, and we got married in a small ceremony at my property, with Tom flying in from Colorado to be my best man and Chief Torres attending as a guest. Stephen came too, along with a dozen other people from the Timber Creek development. It was a celebration not just of a new marriage, but of community, of reconciliation, and of the fact that people can move past conflict when there's genuine effort to make things right. Helen moved into my house, and we made it our house. We expanded the deck, added a garden, and adopted a dog who loved running through the woods. Life was good, peaceful, and free from HOA drama. Sometimes I'd drive past the spot where the barriers had been and remember that week when I couldn't get home, when my life was thrown into chaos by someone's abuse of power. It seemed almost surreal now, like something that had happened to someone else. But it had happened, and it had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, about documentation, about the legal system, and about the importance of people like Chief Torres who do their jobs properly and care about doing the right thing. The final chapter of the story came 5 years after the initial incident. I got a call from Robert, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year. "Zach, I wanted to let you know something. Patricia Hamilton died last week." The news hit me with complicated emotions. What happened? Heart attack, from what I heard. She was living in Florida, apparently had continued her HOA activities down there and was involved in several disputes with neighbors. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything she'd put me through, I didn't wish death on anyone. "I thought you should know, it's really the end of that chapter now." After we hung up, I told Helen. She was quiet for a moment. "That's sad," she said. "I hope she found some peace before the end." "Me too." We didn't talk about it again. There was nothing more to say. Patricia had been a difficult person who'd made bad choices and faced consequences for them. Now she was gone, and whatever demons had driven her to harass people and abuse her power had gone with her. Life continued. The seasons changed, years passed, and my house on the mountain remained my sanctuary. The road stayed clear and open, serving its simple purpose of connecting my property to the outside world. No drama, no barriers, no fights. Just a private road leading to a private life, exactly as it should be. And every time I drove up that road to my home, I felt grateful for the peace I'd fought so hard to protect, and for the lesson learned. That's standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult and expensive and stressful, is always worth it in the end. The barriers were gone, Patricia was gone, and the war was over. What remained was a quiet life on a mountain in North Carolina, a marriage built on solid ground, and the knowledge that some battles, however unpleasant, need to be fought. I'd fought mine and I'd won. And that made all the difference.